I was throwing out a suggestion that today, since we all know the story, we could focus on some of the more, what you might find that you thought was very lyrical, or to use the cliche, I can't think of another word, mellifluous, resplendent prose that he writes. And then I thought maybe to discuss the effectiveness of the conclusion or its weaknesses, as some might do.
I'm sorry I'm late.
Sorry, we just this minute made it
And
a start.
I brought my driver.
Wonderful.
Sorry to interrupt the class.
Can he join? Is that okay if he joins us?
I wanted this.
Excellent.
So you just started, good.
Yeah.
Tom Kurt. I can see.
Tom, I'm Sam.
Say I'm Kurt. I'm Kurt.
And I'm Paul Sharp.
Oh, hey, Paul. How are you? Good. Let's try to get the class
And
started.
then this is our
Hi, Bev Williams.
Ben?
Beverly.
Beverly Williams.
Okay.
Had more fun with my first name than I wanted to.
Well, I was about to say, that's like Johnny Cash.
I was always going to ask you how you got that name, but it must be family related somehow.
Oh, okay.
So, would anyone like, I've got plenty to throw out, but I'd rather have it come from some of our participants. Is there one that you wanted to point to that we could talk about?
I do have one in particular, but I love his sentence structure because the way he does this throughout the book, setting up really, really interesting similes with as if.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite one though is when he first describes Gatsby. He says, if personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity of life, as if we were related to one of those intricate machines that registers earthquakes 10,000 miles away. But he does that a lot, like he sets up his similes with as if.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that because it leaves the sentence
Yeah, that's a good one. I just made a note on that one.
constructive there, right? If you add the sentence with the simile, it's an objective, right? I don't know my sentence structure and grammar that well, but
Subjunctive in English is typically a condition contrary to fact, like if I were you. I'm not sure what you're getting at.
it's like the difference between I'm cleaning the floor because it's dirty, or I'm cleaning the floor as if it were dirty.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're cleaning the floor in both
Yeah.
circumstances,
But he
but
used the subjunctive in the other.
yes. I think, I don't know my sentence
And
straight.
as if it were dirty would imply that it's not dirty.
Right.
That's what I would think.
And
Well, I think that those similes, the introduction and the introduction of very dissimilar objects in his metaphors and similes. So he's got comparing a man with a seismic detector or whatever they call them,
yeah,
the sensitivity of a seismic detector.
but he does that also when he's first introducing Daisy and Jordan. They were both in white and their dresses were really glittering, as if they had just been blown back in after a short flight around the house. He does that very cleverly, many times. And the thing where Jordan's got her chin, she's bouncing,
Balancing something
as if
as if she.
were balancing, yeah.
Okay, now you're gonna make me wanna read it.
But yeah, that's just three examples. But I like the way he does that.
Yeah, he really has a good way with, a very effective way with his comparisons, his similes, his metaphors. And, what else? I've got a few.
Well,
The introduction to chapter 2, which is the Dr. Eckelberg's classes in the ashland and the wasteland,
Mhm.
is very poetic, very, very bleak and very,
What is that? Oh, I've got it here.
very beginning of chapter 2.
Yeah, did you want to read part of that?
Well, I mean, any of it. But, this is the Valley of Ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens. It is just,
Beautifully written.
yeah, it's just absolutely gorgeous. Where ashes take the forms of houses and chimneys and rising smoke. And finally, with the transcendent effort of men who move dimly and are already crumbling through the powdery air. And then, but above the gray land and the spasms of bleak dust which drift endlessly over it, you perceive after a moment the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg are blue and gigantic. The irises are 1 yard high. They look out of no face, but instead from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles, which pass over a non-existent nose. I mean,
It's,
it's just pure poetry. I mean,
Mhm.
I swear I've read before that that's a really direct from the TSL.
the T.S. Eliot's wasteland. Sure. The whole concept of this.
Well, you've got that elegant language, and then the son, after you broke off, I think, down the bottom of my page, after, the retinas are 1 yard high, a pair of enormous yellow spectacles, a non-existent nose, and so forth. Then he says, evidently, comes down to almost the common, the vernacular, evidently some wild wag of an oculist set them there to fatten his practice.
And the road squeeze. But even then, listen to the rhythm of that sentence.
It's like putting them in theater.
It's almost iambic pentameter. It just kind of flows. Even that sentence, to fatten himself on the, and the
The
bureau of
name
queen.
T.J. Eckelberg is iambic.
Yeah.
So weird. Wow, I never thought of that.
So he really can use language.
Yeah, there is a flow to it. It's hard to get it into language, I guess, for me anyway, to describe what it is, but in that paragraph, but his eyes, dimmed a little by many paintless days under sun and rain,
Yeah.
brood on over the solemn dumping ground.
Yeah.
It's just so fluid. I think.
It is. Yeah, I mean, he really pays attention to the rhythm of the words in the sentence.
And sometimes it can be almost what I'd call biblical. Steinbeck does it a lot.
Yes.
He writes, especially in Tortilla Flat. So, and the man came down from the hills and he spoke and the people listened. And, that sort of biblical kind of cadence. A lot of Fitzgerald's, of this novel is very much like that. I don't remember thinking that about other writings of his. Although I think Winter Dreams has some very interesting, very gripping prose in it. But I don't remember thinking it so much about Tender is the Night or Beautiful the Damned. It's been a long time since I read that one. But,
Well, I especially the first one, he had come into his own, The Far Side of Paradise. But no, I think this is far and away his best written in terms of language.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I noticed one in my book, my copy, on page 10. He's talking about the Buchanans and relegating them to the ash heap of meretriciousness. Her husband, I'll read this. Her husband, among various physical accomplishments, had been one of the most powerful ends that ever played football in New Haven. A national figure in a way, one of those men who reach such an acute, limited excellence at 21 that everything afterwards savors of anticlimax. He really blasted him with that one. His family were enormously wealthy. Even in college, his freedom of money was a matter for reproach. But now he left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he brought down a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that. How many polo ponies in a string? I think 6. Imagine transporting 6 horses. I guess by train. I guess, way back, when this is set, they probably didn't have much in the way of big horse fans, did they? Doesn't matter. And then what I really liked was, or again, the content of what I liked was when he said, why they came east, I don't know. Well, we learned later on
Yeah.
that they came east because Tom had been fooling around with some woman and there's some trouble with that. And so they came east, to get away from one of the other messes they created for other people to clean up. And then he goes on later. This was a permanent move, said Daisy. I get the irony in his tone, I think. There was nothing permanent about the Buchanans. But I didn't believe it. I had no sight into Daisy's heart. But I felt that Tom would drift on forever, seeking a little wistfully for the dramatic turbulence of some irrecoverable football game. brings it down to a base level, something as ordinary as a football game. I mean, as momentous as it might be for itself in terms of what goes on in the spectrum of human experience, a single football game, and it ties I think, elegantly ties Tom Buchanan back to his vapid past, where everything just came from his physical strength and prowess on the football field, or his ability on horseback. He certainly, as we find later on, he doesn't have much intellect. I guess he could have, but he just hasn't pursued it. I don't think anybody who got through 4 years at Yale is going to be is going to be stupid. Might be ignorant of a lot of things, but not going to be a stupid person, probably. But he just
Brought up
didn't.
a really interesting point a minute ago that we find out later why they came east. So are we to assume that Fitzgerald was writing it in the moment then? Meaning,
Well,
like, we're finding out with him.
It's in the moment. The narrator only relates what he knows at that time.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, he does.
No, but this is interesting to me. I thought the way he's writing in the past tense and the way he's writing so strikingly historically, I guess it feels like he is more distant from the story. That he's not writing it in the moment. He's remembering this from whatever years later. It seems like his diction is really well planned.
Well, yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense. There's a term for that. I'm just on the term. But I never thought that we're moving through this with him as he's discovering things. I never thought of.
Well, I would say that he's writing it a year or two after this happened.
Okay.
I don't think that, I don't see a big shift in difference.
But that passage is interesting then. Why they came east, I don't know.
Yeah, but
yeah.
in the Chronicles,
Because he does know if he's writing it from a year or two in the future.
Right.
yeah.
I don't know, that's just interesting.
Would it make a difference, small point, would it make a difference if he had written or stated, why they came east, I didn't know?
Yes, that would make entirely different. Or why they came east, I'll tell you later.
Yeah. But he doesn't want to, and you made me think about that, because if the narrator here had explained that Tom had an affair or a scandal,
Or a few.
then it would have pushed my view already in a more negative category about Tom, as opposed to letting me read and see the highly dramatized revelation of Tom's shallowness of his character.
And it
And we
works,
find it later on.
it works better structurally and, narratively if you feel like you're discovering it as you go along.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why
Engage.
it engages you
Yeah.
more to know that there are things that he learns later that impacts how he feels about things. Because he does, he changes his mind about a lot of things as this goes on, including Gatsby. So it doesn't bother me that he may be writing this from a distance, but yeah.
No, it doesn't. I'm not saying it bothers me. It's just that statement was worded strangely. And I hadn't caught that.
I didn't catch it at all, I think, see there. In that same section, right there on the next page, he goes on with some, what I call the juxtaposition of lofty language with a down-home derogatory blasting of Tom Buchanan when he writes, his speaking voice, a gruff, husky tenor, added to the impression of fractiousness he conveyed. There was a touch of paternal contempt in it, even toward people he liked. See, there are lofty language here, big sesquipedalian words. And then he said, and there were men in New Haven who had hated his guts. Brought right down to the Anglo-Saxon words there, a little harder hitting. Now, I don't think my opinion of his manners is final. He seemed to say, just because I'm stronger and more of a man than you are. Really good point. What else we got? We just hit it, little things that come up. About I was looking for, there were two instances in this novel when he referred, when Nick is imagining what the early discoverers of the new continent saw, the Dutchman.
Yeah.
I found one, it's near the end. I got page 189 in mine. But and there's another place, let's see, most of the big shore places were closed now, etc. And the moon rose higher, the inessential houses began to melt away until gradually I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh green breast of the new world, its vanished trees, the trees that had made way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all human dreams. For a transitory, enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. Isn't that good?
Oh, it's fabulous.
I just think he really is very, very eloquent. And perhaps, I was saying, perhaps that mirrors a little bit Gatsby's dreams, in which are not, I think, very realistic. And he's led by his dreams, not driven by his problems, I would say.
Yeah.
But being led by your dreams is admirable, but there has to be some realism.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
this is part of that bitch goddess success, issue, which is that the land originally was pure and pristine and unspoiled, and the American dream has cut down all the trees and put up these houses and spoiled the landscape, and so there is a cost of progress. There is a cost to the American dream, and that's part of it. And you may think the American dream is wonderful, but you have to recognize that it doesn't come without its costs.
And the ash heap
Yeah,
is sort of an objective correlative, I guess, or sort of a metaphor for the detritus of failed or the downside of progress.
yeah, but even in that passage, even the most beautiful places, these places that have beautiful houses and everything, even that is despoiled. And then the far side of it is this utter wasteland, of the ash heap but even at its best, it has a cost. Even if you win the American dream of success, there's a cost. If you don't, there's a huge cost.
Who embodies the achievement of the American dream among these characters? Achievement of the dream.
Nobody.
Well, what is the American dream? We talk about it, but we haven't given it any definition. I'm not sure I'm up to it.
Definitely
But
wealth.
tied with success.
Success.
Your wealth.
Yeah.
The wealth is the big push.
And it's not inherited wealth, it's Horatio Alger wealth.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Rags to riches kind of.
right. And if you have that wealth, everything else is going to work.
But he presents like the prep school boy, the boy who
Because
has money already.
So,
well, the American dream isn't that some people are wealthy. The American dream is that even if you're poor, you can become
Well,
wealthy.
Yeah.
So, Buchanan is not the embodiment of the American dream. That's old world wealth. That's, aristocracy. That's,
he made it the old fashioned way, inheritance.
yeah.
Um,
The right parents.
So Gatsby, in a sense, achieves the dream in that he becomes wealthy, but he doesn't have anything else. He doesn't have any friends. I mean, the guy who took him under his wing on the yacht, the guy who died, I can't remember his name.
Dan Trudy.
Pardon?
Dan Trudy.
Yes. Might have been a friend, although he was old enough to be his father. He didn't have any friends. I mean, he doesn't have,
Even if he
his
had won
romance
Daisy,
is not fulfilled.
even if he had won Daisy, he still would not have. Even if he hadn't been killed and Daisy had done with him and everything, that's still a failure. I mean,
I think at one point, Gatsby and Tom are arguing. And he calls him Mr. Nobody from Nowhere, and
Yes.
he'll always be there.
yeah,
Because of his past, he can't access true success because there are no do-overs. You can't start from, or you can start from scratch, but you'll still never be the true American wealth.
right.
And it just occurred to me, I wonder why it didn't occur to me before to note that the unaffected scorn, I think that was what he used, Nick used to describe his view of Gatsby, seems to me it would certainly be applicable to Nick's view of the Buchanan, or Tom Buchanan. Maybe not so much of Daisy, although I think he entertains at least. I think he's kind of sympathetic to her in one way, but mildly contemptuous of her in other ways because she doesn't really have much beyond her good looks and money. But she seems to be a nice person, but she doesn't contemplate.
He's nice
anything
compared
much.
to Tom.
Yeah.
That's about it.
But he says that in the first page, really.
Mhm.
Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone,
Right.
some of the
Well,
other people in
issues.
the world haven't had the advantages that you've had.
yeah.
But he doesn't always keep that in mind.
No,
Yeah, he says.
and the Daisies and the Toms certainly have had more advantages than Nick had.
Mhm.
So
So,
it would be okay to judge them because they have had the advantage.
well, what kind of advantages?
Material, primarily.
Material advantages,
Yeah,
but maybe not the advantage of having loving, caring parents.
Yeah.
They're raised by
although I don't know about
caretakers,
Daisy.
maybe. That's just a speculation. I couldn't substantiate it.
Yeah.
They have physical advantage, they're beautiful people.
Yes, they do.
Good schools and or with
Yeah.
decent people, I think. But
While we're on the subject of Daisy, I have kind of a side note. I always forget that she's a mother.
Yeah.
And about a year ago, I went and saw the it was a top creative players did the Great Gatsby and cut that out of the play. Or the story, I don't know if the play cuts it out.
Doesn't really.
Or if they chose to nip that out, but she is not a mother in the play. There's never a mention of that. Isn't that weird? Like that detail is so present. I think it completely changes my view
Yeah,
of Daisy.
right.
And it's mentioned so like, oh yeah, she's a 3-year-old, or whatever. That makes a huge difference. I would think.
You don't see her being a particularly loving mother in the book.
Right.
I mean, you don't see her interacting with her child that much to where you think, you know, that's a redeeming feature. It's just that she is. You know that she is a mother. And her comment about her
Oh yeah, that's right.
about being born a fool.
be a beautiful little fool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's not really, you know,
Proud one.
Did someone?
yeah.
I think it was in this group. Someone said that came directly from Zelda's. Yeah.
She said that exact, almost word for word when Scotty was born, their only child.
Yeah, I think somebody pointed out, with you, I think pointed it out last time.
And I think the reason this works better than his other books is the fact that it was so personal to him. You know, I mean, it was almost kind of what he was striving for, except that instead of being a bootlegger, he was a writer. But he was writing things that he thought were not really great. I mean, most of his writing were these 140 short stories that he got paid a lot of money for, but he didn't think very highly of. So in a sense, he's a literary bootlegger, you know, and that enabled him to win the Daisy of his life, you know, Zelda, and so I think that's why he is able to make that so intense and personal.
What was Zelda's status when he was writing the book? Where was she?
They were still together. She hadn't gone totally schizophrenic at this point.
That didn't happen until about 1930.
Yeah,
or something like that.
Yeah, it was quite a bit after.
Yeah.
And so, but they were always having problems as far as marriage. So she was having affairs, he was having affairs. You know, not what you would call a great relationship. There is an absolutely beautiful love letter that Zelda wrote to F. Scott. And I'm wondering where it happened in their marriage, because it's, you know, because it's like, oh, you're the love of my life, and you know, I just love the way you are. No, that wasn't how it went most of the time.
Does any of this story feel disingenuous like that?
Oh, no,
Like that love letter, I mean, like you knew, like a story that you knew it wasn't the way that it was,
right.
but he is still able to paint a beautiful picture, albeit with words.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there any of that disingenuous here in your opinion?
No, I don't see any of it being disingenuous. I think that his use of Nick as a filter,
Yeah.
as a way of stepping away from it himself, allows him to take a more honest approach
Yeah.
than it would be if it was an omniscient narrator, or if the person was the narrator.
Right.
So I think he was clever that way to be able to create a certain little distance. But I think he sees himself as Gatsby, not as Nick, and recognizes the falseness of that life, because he was living a false life. I mean, he was not writing great things. He was living from almost they were spending money faster than they could bring it in. And, and on this merry-go-round, and she, driven primarily by Zelda, who just wanted the exciting life and the expat existence.
Well, there was that anecdote about the two of them in a Paris taxi cab riding along, thoroughly inebriated after dinner or lunch or whatever, and bursting into tears because they knew that they would never again be this happy.
Yeah.
That was pretty pathetic, I thought. Pathetic. You're crying because you can't ever achieve it again. I mean, as though, like Faulkner would say, past isn't past.
Oh, yeah.
It never leaves us.
Yeah. History is in the past. It's not even,
Yeah, it is something like, it isn't even past or something
Right.
like that. That section I mentioned last week about dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. That's on page 63 here.
Oh, what?
Chapter 3, I think, maybe 2. Chapter 3. And it's just a page or two before the end. And he's talking about Jordan Baker, describing Jordan Baker. Instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men, and now I saw that this was because she felt safer on a plane where any divergence from a code would be thought impossible. She was incurably dishonest. She wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage. And given this unwillingness, I suppose she had begun dealing in subterfuges when she was very young in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world and yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunty body. Now, that's a pretty damning passage. You skip down to the bottom of my page, and he says, "For a moment, I thought I loved her.
yeah.
But I am slow thinking and full of interior rules that act as brakes on my desires. And I knew that first I had to get myself definitively out of that tangle back home. Back home, he was about to be engaged, or people thought he was going to be engaged. And so he had to find a way to break that off.
And I love, he had a lot of wit. Almost, there's a line in there that's almost a Dorothy Parker line where Jordan says, and I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy.
Yeah.
So I think he may have known Dorothy Parker at that time. I think he might have been, who was known for her wit and that.
Well, but the comment makes sense in a way. A small party can be very private, and 3 or 4 of us can get together and we'll have a good time together, and we can be relaxed and uninhibited, and that's very nice. But in a huge party, in Gatsby's parties, there's such anonymity that you don't have to worry about what somebody else is going to say about you or think about you or something.
Well, it
Does that make any sense?
but except it was her use of, they're so intimate. I mean, that seems the oxymoron.
Mhm.
It's like, no, it's not intimate. You're using it to get away from it. You don't really want intimacy, apparently. Well, we're talking about the parties.
Because that's vulnerability.
Yeah. Talking about the party, there was on page, in that same chapter, where he's describing the party. It was one of those beautiful language passages where he says, there was dancing now on the canvas up in the garden. Old men pushing young girls backwards in eternal graceless circles, superior couples holding each other tortuously, fashionably and keeping in the corners, and a great number of single girls dancing individualistically or relieving the orchestra for a moment of the burden of the banjo or the traps. By midnight, the hilarity had increased. A celebrated tenor had sung in Italian and a notorious contralto had sung in jazz, and between the numbers, people were doing stunts. And champagne was served in glasses bigger than finger bowls. The moon had risen higher, and floating in the sound was a triangle of silver scales, trembling a little to the stiff, tinny grip of the banjos on the lawn.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
I want to be there.
Oh, yeah.
Gorgeous.
I'm trying to find it in somewhere where he's describing
Is
the
it-
body.
Yeah, it's
And
in
he describes it as yellow music.
Oh,
I thought that was like really out of left field, kind of high modernist description of music being yellow.
Being what?
yellow.
Yellow.
Oh, yeah, I can remember noticing that.
The yellow music.
Yeah.
What is
That-
yellow
that-
music?
I don't know, maybe it comes from brass.
It's a very, very strange way to describe
I know it. I wonder if we've ever heard yellow music.
Saxophones and
I'm trying to find it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
stiff, tinny drip of the banjos. It's really
Yeah.
good, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's, he makes, well, I mentioned a moment ago, for a moment I thought I loved her. That's after he's disparaged her for being
Yeah.
dishonest. And the page before, I forgot. For a while, I lost sight of Jordan Baker, and then Miss Irma found her again sooner or later. And there was something more. I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity that the bored, haughty face that she turned to the world concealed something. Most affectations conceal something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning. And one day I found what it was. I pondered over that phrase. Most affectations conceal something eventually. Aren't affectations in the moment designed to conceal something or to divert attention? To conceal something eventually. Well, not a big deal. I'm just puzzling over it. Jordan Baker's lies. Yeah, moving right along here. What else we got? I've got. Oh, on pages 117 and 18, the very end of chapter 6, the very last paragraphs of that, where Gatsby says, on my page 117 at the top, I'm going to fix everything just the way it was before. She'll see. He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself, perhaps, that had gone into Loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then. But if he could once return to a certain starting place and go over it all slowly, he could find out what that thing was. And that was where I'm suggesting that the quest to recapture the past is a quest for stasis, because when things don't change, they are by definition dead. They don't change then. I mean, it's not to say bodies rot, of course, but to freeze everything like in bas relief or something, or in sculpture. And it reminded me a lot of Gatsby being trapped in the past through his romantic views and intentions of romance with Daisy. He's driven by those dreams, but they're not very. I mean, she must have been, I guess it's plausible, isn't it? I think she was about the only good thing that really ever happened to him. The only romance he'd ever had. I guess he had been with women, but not in a loving sort of way. So I don't doubt his feeling for her, but this idea of trying to rekindle something that was 5 years gone after she had married is and that's a formula for failure, isn't it?
Once again, I can't find it, but there is a passage, Nick is telling Gatsby's story, and after the war, when he got back and he couldn't find Daisy, he went to Louisville. And it described the walking the streets.
Yeah. No change of clothes, no money.
Yeah, and just remembering Daisy, and that's so painful.
Yeah.
Someone trying to relive their past in a place without the person that made it what it was. I really, really thought that passage was interesting.
Chasing ghosts and apparitions.
Yeah. The very end of that chapter, chapter 6, was Gatsby telling about how this dream of his of Daisy comes to be, and he says his heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face come up on his own. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. And at his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. Though through all he said, even though his appalling sentimentality, I was reminded of something. An elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words that I had heard somewhere a long time ago. For a moment, a phrase tried to take shape in my mouth, and my lips parted like a dumb man's, as though there was more struggling upon them than a wisp of startled air. They made no sound, and what I had almost remembered was uncommunicable forever.
Yeah, that's a good passage. I made a few notes there.
Yeah.
Daisy is, with her consent to intimacy with Gatsby,
Yeah.
the incarnation of his dreams, his quixotic quest for that ineffable something of which he is only vaguely aware. She's more symbolic of something.
Yeah.
It's perfectly reasonable. If she is the only really deeply meaningful person in his life, it's quite reasonable that after the war, he would go in search of it. I mean, it was meaningful before. There's no reason to think that he didn't care about her or that he was just pursuing her for physical intimacy. There was a lot more to that relationship in his eyes, I think. And so that's perfectly reasonable, but at some point he's got to realize it wasn't attainable. It wasn't
He doesn't ever let go of his dream. He never gets pragmatic about it at all.
I read an article about the passage you read reminded me of this, about Fitzgerald and jazz.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. It's like listening to improv jazz, like you want a phrase that you remember to be repeated, but it never is in jazz. So in a way, I don't know, this article was talking about how influential that figure was.
Well, I think part of it is just the rhythm of his writing. It's
Yeah.
influenced by jazz.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, we almost do Take 5 to some of his,
Right.
you know, its background, and you know.
There's something haunting about that tune. I was a freshman in college when it was popular, and I always takes me back right there. I love to listen to it.
Yeah.
And at some point, somebody said to me, "Well, it's really kind of boring, because they hit that section in take 5 where it's just syncopation or something, and not much movement."
Well, with the Bolero, I mean, talk about repeated over and over and over again, the same melodies, and yet with enough variation. So there's something for it. He does, he does even get a little syncopation in his rhythm. I mean, Fitzgerald does. He's very, very smart to break it up a little bit,
Yeah, that's the nice thing. Incidentally, anybody have these books that I want? This is called The Shipwreck Cannibals. A true story about something in the 1800s. The reason I do not recommend it is that every sentence in here is a short declarative sentence.
So,
For me, it just got to be so boring. There's interesting facts in here and adventure and all that, but I brought that. But a good friend of mine who enjoys good literature recommended he liked it, but Captain John Dean and the Boone Island flesh-eating scandal. But
That's
the repetition of and really it's just one declarative sentence after another. I mean, there's no, you don't want to do that.
no.
You lose your readers, I think. And I don't find that true of Hemingway's stories, which cliche about his stories is they're short declarative sentences and all. It's like a newspaper writer would write, and all. But they don't. There are compound sentences, and there are, introductory subordinate clauses that make a complex sentence in Hemingway. In this book, there aren't any. It just lost me. I flipped through to the end, and same thing.
I think if I may interject, carrying that point, for whom the bell is tolled, I mean, you have both
Yes,
short, long, almost Faulknerish.
you're right. Yeah, that's right. I stand corrected on that. It's a much more, there's much more from the narrative consciousness informing us
Yeah.
than it is just bald dramatization, conversation, movement, and that. Pilar is really something.
I was going to say, not that Adrian Bergman didn't play a great part in that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good film. One I can enjoy watching a second time, unlike so many.
And it is interesting because, but one of Fitzgerald's greatest weaknesses is actually plotting. And maybe the reason that Gatsby works so well is because this is the best plotted of his novels. It tells the story, it has a nice arc to it, but Hemingway was the master of the story. I mean, of the narrative plotted story. All of his stories had great plots to them. Even his short stories had.
Even Nick Adams.
Had great little plots to them, and so you could read it for the story. It didn't have the mellifluous language that Fitzgerald had, but totally aside, a modern writer who falls into that same trap is Tom Wolfe, who can't plot to save his soul, who is a great writer, who I mean, in terms of language, I mean, The Right Stuff is just beautiful to read. And then you get into he tries to write his novels, pure fiction. They all fall apart in terms of plot. They all just go on, and they don't resolve, And that's
I think of the electric Kool-Aid acid test.
Oh, that's all early. That's not, but that's, in fact, that's a factual story. But he didn't have the ability to really come up with good plots. Hemingway did, but that was his weakness. Shakespeare couldn't write a plot. Shakespeare was terrible with plots. He stole every one of his good stories and every one of his bad plays he tried to create his own plot for it. Like A Winter's Tale. I mean, it's just like, come on.
Well, we'll talk about that sometime.
Go steal a plot.
Yes, I wrote on that.
Yeah, and write on it. And that's where Tom Wolfe, I think, blew it, was that he thought he had to be so original.
Well, he was better as a social critic probably than
Yes.
anything else.
Yeah.
I like, years ago, I read Radical Chic and Mau Mauing
Yeah.
Flat Catchers, which
Right.
was very sardonic
Yes.
and but very effective, I thought.
But
And then
everything
from
he
our
wrote-
house from Bauhaus to our house, or our house to Bauhaus, or something
No,
like that.
yeah.
Silliness of the,
Yeah.
of the socialist influence on architecture. Did you read that one?
Yeah.
It all came out of Germany.
Yeah.
After the First War, I think, the Great War.
But the only reason I pulled that was because his writing style can be as entrancing as Fitzgerald's, but he can't plot.
Well,
You
you
have
get
to
to
go
the
through-
point about the Gatsby not really having much, the plot is Gatsby pursuing the damsel,
Right,
the
right.
madam, not a mademoiselle anymore.
But that's
Married.
okay.
But that's about it. But then I think that as some have said, that I agree with some critics who said the novel is a lot more about Nick Carraway than it is about the ostensible center, Jay Gatsby, or James Gatz, or whatever his real name is. Because it's a journey as a reader. If you read, we read analytically, trying to we're getting behind the consciousness of this narrator. This is what drives him, why he breaks off one engagement, pursues Jordan Baker, thinks he's in love, then thinks he's not. What sort of back and forth does he embody as he,
Do we admire Nick though? Like,
as he beats on boat against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past?
Yeah.
That's the boat he's on. He's going back to his past, isn't he? Back to the Midwest.
Yes. He says he is, yeah.
It occurred to me, though, that he is not, at the end of the novel, Carraway is not moving back to the Midwest in pursuit of something. He's trying to get away from something. He is escaping this awful, the power of the meretriciousness of all this tinsel show that he's found on the trendy East, along with the ash heaps and the metaphorical ash heaps as well as the literal one. Reminds me of one of the early days when riding a train to New York City and going through New Jersey and thinking, my God, is this all the state has? Just railroad tracks and ash heaps and coal piles. It was just awful.
You never hit
realized
Cape
later
May,
on.
you never hit Cape May County.
Right, that's right.
You're up.
That's lovely Cape May and Orange County up further north. Montclair, a beautiful area.
Oh, Arlington County.
The glimpse, I was writing, let's see, in this section that Paul was reading from, I was reminded of something, an elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words. He gets something in the tip of his mind, he can't quite get it, and it gets away from him, as though he's got sort of a glimpse, like who's the classic writer about the man in the cave looking at shadows on the wall,
Plato,
as
actually.
Plato and Aristotle.
Philosophy 101.
So he's glimpsing something sort of like the Dutchman that he's apostrophizing here, addressing as though imagining that they saw something inexplicably splendid that was just so awesome to them.
But it's also a clever device to say, I don't quite understand all this,
Yeah,
I don't really get it. There's something deep and significant and philosophical here, but can't articulate it.
yeah, trust me, it's
Yeah.
there.
It's there, but I can't articulate it.
Yeah.
And that is, both honest, and a cop at the
Yeah,
same time.
it's a good device,
Yeah.
like a Deus Ex Machina is a device,
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering though, I'm a big fan of Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, where at the end he says, truth is beauty and beauty truth. That is all you know in the world and all you need to know.
Yeah.
And so if beauty and truth are lost, even destroyed in and by the Philistine pursuits that can smother us, whether we are exerting any kind of puny force or are more or mere bystanders, is sort of caught up in a maelstrom of imponderable vastness and meaninglessness. That was the absurd extension of all that. But the poem itself describes the urn where the young man is reaching for the damsel, and she is smiling, looking back, but he's not touching him. And the line was, what is the line? It's something like, and forever will he pursue and forever will she be beautiful, or something like that. And it reminded me of what is, as long as Gatsby has a dream to chase, life has meaning for him.
Yeah.
But if he reached it, as I guess Paul was, somebody was pointing out, suppose he and Daisy reunited and she divorced Tom and they married and all that. It wasn't going to be
It's not gonna be-
convincing.
Yeah.
And so for Gatsby, as he gets towards the end, he realizes that it ain't all it was cracked up to be, even in his own mind.
Well, and he realizes that Daisy has, obviously feet of clay and and
So as his dream is destroyed, I found I guess it's a bit of a stretch, but I thought it was sort of a poetic justice that he dies in the end because his dream is dead. What's he got to live for? I mean, nothing. He doesn't really care about being wealthy, does he? I mean, not like what's his name in Winter Dreams, who wanted the things as we were reading. He didn't just want to be around.
The only reason
Rich.
he wanted wealth was to impress Daisy.
Yeah. That was his driving force. And the book, I think the novel does not conclude by telling me that he didn't achieve his dream and so was disillusioned.
right.
But that was the drift I was getting. So I haven't articulated it very well, or I haven't substantiated it very well, but that's the feeling that I got about it. That thing is a little bit anticlimactic. He's standing out there, standing guard, while Tom and Daisy are in there and they're touching hands, and there's sandwiches and bottles of beer that they're not fooling with, but they're in there planning how to avoid this scandal, how to make sure that nobody finds out she was the driver who killed Myrtle Wilson. And there's nothing for Gatsby. Caraway says something about it too. He stood there in nothingness, watching over nothing, or something like that. At the end of that, I can't remember what it was. I thought that was a good conclusion. Well, I'm sorry, I can't find it. I should have marked it better. Well, is I heard somebody, not a critic, but just another student like me, say, I don't think Fitzgerald prepared for the ending very well. I mean, in the end, this guy, this fellow, this classmate of mine was saying, in the end, all he does is what other cheap novelists do. He just kills the main characters. They all are dead, and then so that's the end. Gatsby's dead, Myrtle's dead, Wilson is dead, and the Buchanans bugger off wherever they're going.
Well, would Macbeth have been a great play if Macbeth hadn't died in the end? I mean, or Lear or Hamlet. I mean, if Hamlet had become king, instead. I mean, the tragedy is that it becomes a tragedy because they die. And because and tragedy in Greek was always about the flaw of the tragic hero.
Yeah.
They're always killed by their own flaws.
Yeah, there has to be a flaw. There has to be a great fall.
It has
It has to be somebody of preeminence.
Right, but if they didn't have it has to be the flaw itself that kills them,
Yeah,
you know.
jealousy for Othello,
Right.
indecision for Hamlet,
Right.
ambition for Macbeth.
Right, right. And so, you know, with Gatsby, you know, it becomes tragic when he dies. If he had just gone off and said, oh, well, you know, I lost that one, it's not tragic.
That's right, yeah.
What if Daisy had died?
What if Daisy had died?
What if George figured it out?
Oh, but George wasn't smart, that's a big difference.
Or
But
somebody told him?
supposedly somebody told him. Yeah. I don't know, spent a lot of time
That-
speculating about that.
Very interesting.
That would be,
but, what
that's a straight. The person who really deserved to die was Tom, but of course he doesn't. And that's the societal tragedy, is that often the worst get away with it.
And Nick doesn't correct him.
Yeah,
Importantly, when they meet,
right.
Tom has his own truth in his mind, and Nick could have corrected him.
Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah. And of course Daisy isn't gonna kill him.
Are there characters in this novel that you might think do not serve to advance the novel? I mean, are there flaws here that,
I could have done without Wolfsheim.
Wolfram and his connections?
Yeah.
Well, I guess he brings up the idea, you know, with the accent and the diction
Yeah,
he uses, that it's a seamier side of Gatsby's history, dealing with people like that. And then somebody, I think Paul mentioned the telephone call comes in and Gatsby is saying, well, something or other, he's not the kind of guy we need for this job or something.
What about the border? The guy with the glasses that was pointing out that the library books are real.
Yeah.
I the minor characters I think add little significant things. You know, I mean, they let you in on certain facts that you might not.
Right.
Because if Nick had noticed that the books were real, it's
It would
it's
have
different.
been as
Right.
genuine.
And he doesn't waste a lot of time with those minor characters. You know, they'll put 2 or 3 paragraphs in about the guy with the hourglasses and the guy who lost his shoes and, you know, they're all these little hangers on, you know, and
Piano player.
yeah, the piano player, you know. So,
He was the guy who didn't have anywhere to live. wasn't he?
right.
So he just kind of
Yeah.
slept on the floor.
Yeah, Cliff Singer, I think was his name.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Oh, you remember when Caraway is listing the names of the people
Oh, yeah.
that came, and it was
Yeah,
in and of themselves individually, I guess there's nothing wrong, but I think it was done in a very sardonic way to say these names are, to say to me, the reader, these names are very pretentious. Don't you agree? And I had to agree to a certain extent. I had the daggone thing. Oh, there is 66 in my book. I mean, it's like a cataloging of names. Oh, there was Dr. Webster Sibbett, who was drowned last summer, and the Hornbeams, and the Willie Voltaires, and the Blackbucks, and the Christies, and the Clarence Endive, from East Egg, and the Cheadles, and the Schraders, and the Stonewall Jackson Abrams of Georgia, and the Fish Guards, and the Ripley Snells, and the names are rather fanciful, but the Dancies, the Sweats, the Whitebait, the Flink, the Hammerheads, the Beluga, the Tobacco Reporter, and Beluga's Girls. But a lot of them like Roebuck and Sharon and Gulick, and they're might be unusual names, but there's nothing. Anyway, I think he was trying to describe a certain pretentiousness here, but I'm not sure that I agree with it. And I don't know why he cataloged all these names. Anybody got an answer for that? I knew a guy named Muldoon once, tall, strapping guy, with polo ponies.
It almost seems like he's.
But he was a good sort of fellow. He wasn't like Buchanan. I don't know, why did he put that in there? Is he just taking up space, or is it,
Oh, that was.
did these names
Nick is
suggest,
paid by the word.
did they suggest pretentiousness as you were reading
They
this?
suggest city,
Hmm?
because why would, if they're so important, why are they coming to a party where they don't have a vote?
Exactly. People who live to thrust their name in front of us. No other purpose in life.
I just think he's showing that each party's attractive.
Some of them are funny. Cat lips. Cat lips. Anyway, modern point, I probably shouldn't even try to bring that one up.
The other author who tries that gimmick is John Cheever. Not as successful.
You mean listing, cataloging
Cataloging.
last names?
I've only read Swimmer, and he definitely does that with the neighbors.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Well, I feel that the ending to this story it works for me. I think it's effective and appropriate. I disagreed with, I think that other graduate school classmate of mine was trying to be provocative more than he really believed. It was like an old-fashioned Western movie where you just kill everybody, and then you don't have to have any denouement. You got a couple of survivors, and everybody else gets killed. You have to deal with it.
It's real though, the way it ends, like it's just a memory for like no one knows what really happened except Nick. So this is like his truth to carry. It kind of gets into that in the final passage.
And I think he's the way he ends it, this philosophical touch to it, that he tries to wrap it up philosophically, is again reminiscence of Conrad. He doesn't want to wrap up like Aesop and say this is the moral,
Yeah.
but he does want to leave you with a sense of what this means, even if what it means is ambiguous, even if what it means is not clear cut, do this, don't do that. So
Yeah,
it works for me.
I agree with you. I think that to be too conclusive, for an author or writer to be too conclusive is to impoverish
Right.
the reader and to insult the reader. Well, that's too strong a word, but to disallow the reader to draw her own or his own conclusions in a reasonable way. That's why I like Peter Taylor's stories so much, because there's a conclusiveness but an open-endedness to them. And Hemingway's, a lot of those are pretty much the same way, I think.
Right.
But those that have like For Whom the Bell Tolls, that have a definite plot to them and definite character development, I mean, they have an ending that is, well, it didn't make me wonder about the universe, but it did make an impression on me about the awfulness of war and the value of patriotism and fidelity and the perfidy of some and the jealousies of others. And so I thought it was I just think it's a really good novel. But it leaves, plot sorry, what was the gentleman's name? Kirk. Kirk. As Kirk pointed out, the plot is really good. And good example of really well-developed plot. As blowing that bridge was everything.
That was,
Is it?
yeah.
Well, we're nearly out of time. Where do we go from here? What have we left uncovered? Is there something that, still got time? I have plenty of time.
One of the things we talked about was why does it not work as a movie? Why does it work as a novel?
Oh,
but not
yeah,
as a movie?
yeah.
The movie was terrible.
Huh? Oh, they,
It's awful.
yeah, I mean, the last one, which was very splashy and glitzy and,
DiCaprio.
huh?
The DiCaprio one, right? Leonardo DiCaprio.
Right,
Yeah.
right. The Baz, I forget what his last name is, the director. But, it's, huh? Lerman? Yeah. Thank you. It captured the feel of the parties. It captured that, but it missed, I think, the rest of the whole book, which was kind of peripheral to it. It really did a good job of the glitz, but not of the substance.
I mentioned before that I saw the play when Ted did it in Oxford. I don't think it worked to the play either.
Right.
Yeah, but the same reason.
Well, part of it is that it's a really complex and deep, and philosophy doesn't really work that well.
Right. Hard to dramatize it.
Yeah, it is. If it has any real depth to it, I mean, or if it has a really long, complicated plot like Exodus, it's just a horrible. If you read the book and then you saw the movie, you go, "This is awful. This has nothing have anything to do with the book," But you couldn't have made the book into a movie.
Just get a narrator.
You could have had a series for 3 seasons, on television would have worked better, but as a hour and a half movie, ain't gonna happen. I think that's part of it. It's the complexity of it. It's just not suited for movies. Movies like plot-driven stories.
Yeah.
They're not as good at character-driven. And, one of the reasons I think Shakespeare's plays work so well is because he really tries to make them character drives the plot. But there's really a plot in all of his great stuff, And so, his whole thing is character is destiny, and so,
Yeah.
but without the plot,
Well, around the plot, it's structured all the human aspirations and evil and selfishness and generosity and everything else that love,
Yeah.
hate, everything is in there. That's where he shows that he was really pretty perceptive about human nature and motivation and what drives people. For me, in the latest Gatsby movie, DiCaprio, well-known actresses and actors for me have a certain kind of persona.
right.
And I don't mean just to relegate them all, because many of them can do a lot of different roles. But DiCaprio is too boyish for me to be in that role, even though Gatsby's not an old character at all. I thought Robert Redford was much better cast.
Fabulous, yes.
And even that movie was too long. A lot of close-ups on fineries. I remember dishware, dishes, and
Ralph Lauren, Polo,
yeah.
Did all the
all
clothes.
the costumes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all of the movies have been really great on costumes.
But what was the early one? Who was in the early one? Barrymore or
Oh, I have no idea. I've never seen the
there's
first
one that was made in the 40s or 50s.
I don't know.
Oh, Mia Farrow, yeah.
Robert Redford.
She
Yeah.
was Daisy with Roberts, yeah,
Right.
yes.
Another. Well, I shouldn't say this, but I think she was miscast.
You do?
I don't.
Oh, yes.
Well, I don't think she's pretty enough.
No, but she, yeah.
Just a comment, she didn't, but that may be just my own view, having seen her in other films and stuff, and so she's not very. On the other hand, we didn't want a bombshell, did we?
No,
And we didn't want somebody strong like Katharine Hepburn, she would, that wouldn't have worked.
No.
She's just too strong. She brings such strength to the screen in her acting. She wouldn't have been successful. So I don't know who I would have picked. If I were casting, who would you have picked? Meg Ryan, maybe in her younger days?
Earl Street.
No.
Earl Street, too strong?
Yeah, too strong and not,
see, I think Mia, she's so fragile.
Yeah.
See, I thought she
yeah.
was perfect for the role. Yeah, she's that fragile, sweet, kind of, airhead-ish, whatever, yeah. Like you said, you couldn't have picked somebody strong, just strong,
Had to be someone more.
Just too.
yeah. But it wouldn't fit, because that's, of course, not who he wrote about, so, yeah.
And although I think Maggie Smith can do about anything,
She
I don't think she would have been
No.
good either. Because I know too much about her.
I know it.
I'd bring all my other experience with her as a
Totally.
really strong.
Yeah.
She was really good, incidentally, in that Graham Greene movie, Traveled with My Aunt. She played the Auntie Mame type figure in that,
Oh,
in that
okay.
film. She was really good. I can't remember who the nephew was, the narrator. Irrelevant point, but I don't think she would have worked either.
No, the 1949 movie,
Yeah,
that
who is
starred
it?
Alan Ladd.
Oh, yes.
And-
Really?
Yeah, and the other people I don't really know. Betty Field, Ruth Hussey, Barry Sullivan, Shelley Winters. Must have been
I know that.
Shelley Winters was Daisy?
She must have been Myrtle, yeah.
Oh, she was
What I would
perfect for
guess.
that.
She's perfect.
Yeah. Oh, she was perfect for that.
Who was the other, I recognize, Barry Sullivan. I recognize
Barry
his
Sullivan.
name.
Yeah. No, I don't know any of those people.
Very
49.
manly, makes me think of Randolph Scott.
Yeah, Alan Ladd, I think, must have been Nick.
Can you picture him in that? I can't.
He's Gatsby, wouldn't
Oh,
you
is he
think?
Gatsby? Maybe, maybe.
Yeah, he's a very handsome.
He is.
Guy,
Yeah.
and would,
McDonald Carey.
I pictured Mae West.
As Myrtle would be perfect.
Yeah.
You're spot on.
49, that would have been too late.
Yeah.
That would have been perfect. You're so right. Correct.
Just the way she was described.
Oh.
Look.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gatsby was Alan Ladd.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And-
I gotta look
and-
at
and
a
Nick
picture
Carey
of him.
was, but Nick Carraway was Donald Carey.
I
Huh.
recognize his name, but I can't picture him.
Alan Ladd.
Daisy
was
Buchanan
Gatsby.
was Betty Field.
Good Lord.
Huh?
Alan Ladd was Gatsby.
Yeah.
See, I don't agree. Do you? I can't imagine him as that.
This cast,
Well, he's a short, very, very fit looking,
Yeah.
handsome
Yeah.
guy.
Not handsome enough,
Oh, he's not.
I would think, to play that part, but isn't that interesting? So 1949.
How about Robert Stack?
Yeah.
That's which?
That's Gatsby.
Oh. Yeah, maybe.
Well, it's fun to be a director for a day here in our
Oh,
little
yeah.
seminar.
Can you imagine?